Welcome to the Barack Obama Book Club. I'm Lacey, your host, and today we're reviewing a book called The Vanishing Half, written by Brit Bennett. Barack approved it himself, even putting it on his favorite books of 2020 list. It's a real page-turning novel about white passing twins, Stella and Desiree. From page 39, the novel calls the twins two bodies poured into one, now separated. Stella chooses to live her life as a performance, pretending to be white, while Desiree, the other twin, chooses to stay true to her identity and self. Together, we'll go in depth about how effectively becoming white has changed Stella, as well as its impacts on the people around her. We even have a special guest for you guys tonight, interviewed by my co-host Nithya Nair. But first, let's talk about what this book was about. This is a spoiler warning. The novel starts off with twins, Desiree and Stella, who are growing up in a small town called Mallard, which is completely inhabited by light-skinned black people. The twins decide to run away from Mallard at the age 16, where they eventually separate, Desiree marrying a dark-skinned man and having a child, Jude, and Stella living her life as white passing, resistant to tell anyone the truth about her heritage. As time passes, the twins become more and more unique and separated. In the beginning, they were considered two halves of the same whole. Now they're nothing alike. The novel explores themes of racism, where Stella heavily discriminates against dark-skinned individuals, though she herself is not white. Another theme would be privilege, showing the stark contrast between Stella's life as a white woman and Desiree's. Bennett even touches on gender identity, including a transgender man, a drag queen, in their stories and struggles.
Hey everyone, co-host Nithya here. Before we give our own thoughts on the book, I have here with me Brit Bennett, the author of The Vanishing Half. Hi Brit.
Hi Nithya, thank you so much for having me on.
Of course, it's such a pleasure to have you on the show. Because I know that you have limited time with us, I'll ask you these questions quick. What was your inspiration for the characters and plot of The Vanishing Half?
Okay, well actually, Stella Vignes was a character heavily influenced by my own personal life. I grew up in a small town, always wanting to get out and make something bigger than myself. And it's kind of embarrassing to admit, but honestly, as Stella's character is not exactly likable, it's kind of based around myself. And a lot of my inspiration also came from stories that my southern mother told me growing up. She grew up in a rural town in Louisiana, Palmetto, and I remember once she told me this like it was completely normal, that families in these small towns would intermarry so their children would become lighter and lighter over time.
Wow.
Yes, so that really sparked the inspiration for this book. I just thought it was so interesting that a whole population would collectively try to change their genetics to become lighter. And that's why I really wanted to explore this in The Vanishing Half and display it through this made-up town called Mallard.
You said before that Stella was based on yourself, but what was the reason behind characters like Reese and Barry, who explore their gender identity rather than racial?
So what I knew before writing this book was that I really wanted to explore the concept of identity and how we become who we are. Obviously, the twins are my starting point because I wrote about how they separated and grew into these different communities and how they took charge of their destiny by making these pivotal decisions about themselves. But I also wanted to depict other types of identity because identity is so much more than what race you decide to present as. There are so many ways that we create ourselves, and I think that's why I implemented characters like Reese and Barry who show different ways that we use to shape who we are.
That's very interesting. All right, last question here. All throughout the book, there's this suspense of whether or not Stella will get caught by her family and she'll have to tell them that she's been passing as a white person the entire time. But in the end, she only comes clean to her daughter Kennedy, and we never find out if her husband finds out. Why did you leave such an ambiguous ending for Stella?
Well, I think for me, rather than having Stella's story end with something definitive, I ended her story with ambiguity because I wanted those moments of self-reflection. In older passing stories, there's often this trope of, oh, the character's gonna get caught, or something's gonna happen when they get caught. But for Stella, I wanted to focus more on, if she doesn't get caught, then what happens next? And I feel like this loop of endless lies is what really helps the readers understand Stella's character and why she feels like she has to do what she did.
Well, thank you so much for coming on here, Brit. It's so interesting to hear your ideas for such a thought-provoking novel.
Yes, of course. Hopefully Barack Obama will read another one of my books so I can be on the podcast again.
All right, next up we have fan interviews to hear your guys' thoughts on this book. But before we jump into that, let's hear a quick word from our sponsor.
Have you ever craved some good Southern home cooking? Ever wanted to taste how they do things down south? Then hop on over to Lou's Egg House and enjoy an authentic meal experience with excellent staff and mouth-watering food. Order some buttermilk pancakes, delve into some buttery grits, or take a crack at the Desiree Special, which lasts from November 1st through November 30th. You're this close to a taste of heaven, so what are you waiting for? Use the promo code BarackFest, spelled BARACKFEST, when you order on DoorDash to get 25% off your first order. Thank you from Lou's Egg House for sponsoring us today, and without further ado, let's get back to the show. Thank you.
Dang, Lou's Egg House sounds pretty good. Might have to go there sometime. But now we have Kate, an avid listener of the Barack Obama Book Club podcast, who is the original person who asked us to talk about this book. Kate, I'm so glad you could join us.
Of course, glad to be here.
Kate, you read the book. How do you feel about Stella's character development?
Well, off the top, in the beginning of the story, Brit described the twins as struggling teenagers. At that age, it's pretty normal. Trying to find their identities and having to put their education on pause to help make money for their family. While Desiree wanted to leave the town, Stella was the quiet type and was indifferent when Desiree wanted to say that she always wanted to leave. If Desiree would leave, she would though too, because they were part of each other as best friends and sisters. The initial surprise in the book, referencing Stella's character change, was when we found out she was the one to choose to leave the town that night instead of Desiree. Thereafter, more and more decisions proved Stella had completely changed her identity down to her race and origin. She left her city alone in the city, she cut off all contact from her family, and she had become someone I personally did not like at all, from the way she would treat others, her lies, and the betrayal of her own family, as well as the racist white stereotype at the time of the 1960s she portrayed.
Dang, I completely agree. Stella's character development into an antagonist of the story because of her actions. Can you elaborate on the racist white stereotype?
Of course, yes. In many chapters of the book, Stella had shown or said outright racist statements and used the ideology that white means you're better than others, as well as being snotty towards others and treating them as lesser than because of her money status. And one of the quotes from the book, it stated that Stella wouldn't even hire colored help for the house, and she claimed that Mexicans worked harder from page 147. That alone represented how she viewed colored people and stereotyped against Mexicans as better workers because of their lower status in America during the time period. Such as with her neighbor Loretta, when she once saw her daughter playing with Loretta's child, she ran out as if her daughter was in danger and grabbed her inside, and when her daughter had said the N-word, she had slapped her. This initially was when the two's relationship had begun to split because of her mother's bipolar actions and because of her own infliction of a race she was experiencing.
I definitely agree that Stella really represented the white stereotype, and man, her actions were upsetting. The one thing that stood out in the entire book was always knowing that Stella wasn't really white and it was all a facade. Knowing she would say such terrible things to others and treat them differently when she herself could be put in their position if her true race was acknowledged. All right, I just have one more question for you before I let you go.
Hit me.
What powers influenced Stella's choice to pass as white?
Powers that influenced her decision, at least in my opinion from reading the book, was her education and seeing how dark-colored people were treated comparing to people with light-colored skin. Mm-hmm. In her small town, if you were dark, you were told you were ugly and segregated out, but if you were light, you were called beautiful with beautiful skin. Simple things like going to a museum and only white people allowed in, and colored people had to wait in a line. When she strutted in with confidence and not scared to be caught, she represented the white stereotype of confidence, like becoming a person she was not. The powers of society and government divisions segregated color and white, making Stella choose to be the one with more benefits in society.
That's what I really liked about this book. Its realism of the structures of society as well as what was going on in that time period of desegregation and protests occurring. It described the stories of how divided people were due to the color of their skin. Thank you for joining us on our podcast, Kate. Have a nice day.
Hi, co-host Sophia here.
And Nithya. We have even more questions asked by our listeners that we just couldn't go without talking about tonight.
First, we have Steph from Los Angeles asking, what stereotypes did Desiree and her daughter Jude face that Stella and her daughter Kennedy did not? Thank you for the great question, Steph.
Yeah. Throughout the book, there were so many instances where Stella and Kennedy lived completely different lives than Desiree and Jude. I think one of the biggest differences is how Jude and Kennedy view their education. Jude had no support to fall back on with her mother in Mallard, and she had no choice but to work hard, while Kennedy had no doubt that she wanted to pursue acting and drop out of college. It was interesting the way that privilege played a big role in developing the two characters.
Yes, I completely agree. Adding on to that, I think that it was interesting to see that even Stella, who had internalized racism within herself and would have been fine if her daughter dropped out of school if Stella had been fully white, but she actually was shocked that her own daughter did not want to pursue higher education, because growing up, all Stella had wanted was to go to school and fulfill her dreams of becoming a teacher. But she grew up still connected to her African American heritage and did not have the privilege to drop out of school. And though that connection may have been frayed, it was still hanging on to Stella. She knew she could never fully ignore it.
That brings a good point. There were a lot of differences between the twins and their daughters, and that brought such an interesting dynamic to the novel, keeping things moving and constantly changing, as identity is. It's so malleable, and that motif is portrayed regularly by Bennett throughout the novel. Also, I thought it was interesting how on page 333, Kennedy felt her newfound black identity part of herself was, quote, like a single detail that had been swapped and replaced, like how swapping out one brick wouldn't change a house into a fire station. Nothing had changed, end quote.
Definitely. I think that kind of shows how Kennedy's blackness is so easily discardable to her, and how her privilege can be used as a sort of shield for herself. Since Kennedy grew up completely separated from her black identity, she did not feel emotionally connected to it like Desiree, Jude, or even Stella did. So that kind of shows how Kennedy could choose to ignore that side of herself, while, especially for Jude, it was her everyday reality. Another great example of what we were talking about is this detail about Stella having a scar on her thumb being the only physical difference between the twins. And later on in the book, it's mentioned that Desiree becomes a fingerprint analyst. I just thought that was an amazing but subtle connection to the book. Stella had this permanent indentation in her life, her connection to her past and her scar on her thumb being a reminder of it. Desiree becoming a fingerprint analyst signifies, I guess, devoting one's life to a field and not leaving it. Desiree held on to her black past in a way that did not choose to fully erase it from herself. I just thought that was a really intriguing example of how different the two are.
Wow, yeah. What a great example of a key difference between Desiree and Stella's lives. It's also so crazy how much privilege can change the trajectory of someone's life, as we talked about with Kennedy and Jude. Now, moving on as we reach the end of our episode tonight, let's bring it back to Lacey.
Thanks, Nithya. Now, of course, on the Barack Obama Book Club, after we finish a good book, we always collect ratings. I really want to hear what all of your opinions are and the ratings of the book. What did you all enjoy about the book, and what would you have wanted to be different? Let's start with Kate.
Well, I think I would give the book an 8 out of 10 because I feel like there were a few unanswered questions, such as Stella and her husband. I really wanted to find out if he ever got the chance to uncover Stella's past.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I love the book, especially Reese and Jude's pure relationship and their bond that they have over their identities. I would give it a 9 out of 10 just because of the unanswered questions, like Kate said.
Yeah, I agree with both of you guys. I would give the book an 8.5 out of 10 because I enjoyed the pacing and how it explored a time era over 40 years post-Jim Crow laws and an era of desegregation, plus the exploration of gender identity.
You guys all have really good points. I would give this book an 8 out of 10 because of the attention to detail and interesting plotline that Bennett introduces throughout the book. All right, we had so many great discussions here tonight, and we were even lucky enough to talk to Brit Bennett herself. Thank you to all of our listeners and those who even sent out questions. We appreciate you guys. Thank you to our co-hosts Nithya and Sophia, and thank you to our avid listener Kate for coming on. You can even listen to Barack Obama Book Club podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere that you can listen to podcasts. Also, don't forget to stop by Lou's Egg House for that Desiree special and use code BROCKFEST for your 25% off your first order. We hope you tune in next time. Bye-bye.